Striking scorpions. Scorpions that strike, I suppose. In this video, I'll be painting some classic metal striking scorpion models, talking about their history and the rules for these in the old editions of Warhammer 40k. I'll also share what was for me a moving story behind my receipt of these old sculpts. I'm Matthew, this is Miniscape, welcome. If you're into older Warhammer models, you've come to the right place. If you like 2nd edition 40k too, this is the channel for you. And I have an Instagram account too if that floats your boat. There are ways to support the channel too if that's something you'd like to do. Details in the video description. I've painted up a few Eldar so far, in an attempt to put together a functioning army for 2nd edition 40k. And by a few, I mean just a handful of Howling Banshees. So, not much progress yet. The Banshees came from eBay. The Striking Scorpions, though, they were donated by Tim, along with many more. There's an intriguing detail to that story, but as I said before, I'll mention that later. So do stay to the end to hear that. The models here are the original Striking Scorpions from back in Rogue Trader days. I'll have a look at some old White Dwarf magazines in a bit, but I'll slap on a bit of paint first. After cleaning up the old miniatures, namely stripping their original paint job, trimming away mould lines and rebasing them, I gave them a white prime to help ramp up the saturation of the later colours. Before I begin, please bear in mind that the techniques that I am using are not optimal. Indeed, I wouldn't even describe this as a tutorial, it's just my painting journey with the resources I had at the time. I would rather use up old paints than buy new ones, so I'll always try and find a solution along those lines if I can. And this probably won't surprise you, but I'll be painting my Striking Scorpions with a bright green because that's just the way I want them. So as you can see, I'm beginning with a white prime, which I achieved using a Citadel spray can, only because Colourforge wasn't on sale at the store I frequented. You can see as well, I've textured the base first, using some sand. I started with Citadel Warpstone Glow, and I thinned this a little with some airbrush thinner. I use an old brush to slop this all over the armour, ensuring it gets into the recesses. However, since I want the chainsword and the shuriken pistol to be yellow, I leave these white at this stage. After a couple of thin coats of this green mixture, I can move on to the next step, which will be some further shading. And here's what it looks like after a couple of thin coats. Now let me just be clear, this is not a good looking miniature at this stage. It's patchy, but hopefully you can see that this won't matter after further layering. If you've watched any of my paint jobs before, you'll know that I like to slap on the paint with carefree abandon until something passable emerges. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. The next step involves adding some more shading this time through the application of some orc flesh contrast paint. Again, thinned ever so slightly with Vallejo airbrush thinner. This goes all over the armour, just like the previous coat. And to be honest, I could probably get away with just painting either one of the previous steps, not necessarily both. And this is what I did with some of the Striking Scorpions I have painted beforehand, doing the orc flesh step only. However, I just wanted to do something different this time. If you've seen my videos before, you'll know how I like to experiment. That all takes a little while to dry, but in the next stage, I continue with the armour, using an older paint called Citadel Scorpion Green. The modern equivalent seems to be Moot Green, but I may be wrong. I take my time using multiple thin layers of this paint to cover all of the armour panels, and leave the dark green showing in the recesses. This is quite a time-consuming step, but I feel it's the right one, given the outcome I desire. Not all the armour remains green. Instead, some of it will be blue or yellow. You'll see later. And this is what our model looks like after a few thin coats of scorpion green paint. I plan to paint the weapons yellow, but I want a nice white base coat beforehand, so I touch up the weapons with white paint to cover the green that spilled over onto those parts. Vallejo White is my go-to paint for a job such as this. While that is drying, I'm going to use a dark grey paint which I mixed up myself to paint the straps and the holster and the pockets and things. This colour was achieved by mixing a little bit of black and Wolf Grey by Warpaints Fanatic. The reason I'm painting this onto all these areas is to act as the shadow which breaks up the model into its components a bit better. It makes it easier to see where one part starts and another part ends, but this isn't going to be the base colour. For that, I use Warpaints Fanatic Wolf Grey by itself, which I thin down a little and paint onto all these areas in a couple of thin coats, but leaving the recesses as the previous grey colour. This particular colour has become one of my favourites over the last 6 months, as I've found many places to use it instead of Thunderhawk Blue by Citadel, which, don't get me wrong, still has its uses. But don't worry, Thunderhawk Blue, you're still my first love. You're really first in my heart. You're probably top of my chart. Anyway, I watered down a little bit of black paint and paint this on the 3 gems again. Just putting down some shadows. The gem itself will be red later on. And then I'm going to mix a little bit of white with Wolf Grey and paint this around some of the edges as a highlight. When it comes to some edges, mainly those most upper-facing ones, or the edges that are more pointy. Anyway, for the edges, I tend to mix in a little bit more white with the Wolf Grey to make them pop a bit more. And this is how the good fellow looks, after all the grey has been painted, shaded and highlighted. Over the years, there have been a few iterations of Striking Scorpion miniatures, beginning in 1990, which are of course the kind I am painting in this video. Replacements came in 2000, 2006 and 2024. White Dwarf 124 from April 1990 contains a preview of the first iteration of Striking Scorpion models, in the form of concept art from the sketchbook of Jez Goodwin. The style of these is firmly established right here, and annotated in detail. The chainsword, the mandiblasters, the aspect symbol, and the fancy dreadlocks on the Exarch. It's all here. Models for Aspect Warriors were released a few months later in July 1990. White Dwarf 127 has a chunk of content dedicated to them. Also extensive background lore, familiar artwork, and a full army list giving one the tools to employ Eldar in their games of Rogue Trader. A squad of 5 Scorpions was 180 points in Rogue Trader, and any number of these could be included in your army. Their profile and war gear are very similar to their counterparts in 2nd edition. One notable difference is that mandiblasters only go off if a hit is made in hand-to-hand combat prior. Later in this White Dwarf magazine, there's some useful paint schemes for your Aspect Warriors, displayed in this cute cartoon style, followed by an article expounding the sage wisdom of John Blanche, describing the appropriate colours and methods to use when painting your new aspects. The catalogue section at the back of the publication has the prices for 1990. They could be purchased for 60p each, or 5 for $2.99. And then there's some images of the unpainted miniatures, and the back page has one painted for you, either by Mike McVeigh or Tim Prow. There were 4 sculpts of Striking Scorpions available. The pages at the back of the Eldar Codex for 2nd edition 40k number them as 4, 1, 2 and 3. Strange that they're in that order. Although by total coincidence those are the last 4 digits of the phone number of a girl who I had a crush on at school. What are the chances? Striking Scorpion 1 is the only sculpt I am missing, and the Exarch as well I suppose, which was this chap here. White Dwarf 130 has more Aspect Warriors show up in the heavy metal pages, and of course, Striking Scorpions feature. Their scheme isn't as saturated as 2nd edition, so it's interesting to see how the painting styles of the heavy metal team changed over the years. In April 1994, White Dwarf 172 heralded the release of the first Eldar Codex for 2nd edition 40k. There's nothing new here in terms of models for the Striking Scorpions, but as befits this edition, they do seem brighter. The next model line for the Scorpions came in 2000, along with the release of the Craft World Eldar supplement. These models are different. The helmets are more stinging, for sure. And they have more dynamic poses, I suppose. They're fine, though I prefer the older ones. In the Eldar Codex for 2nd edition 40k, Striking Scorpions are a squad's choice. Each model costs 26 points, and they are assembled in squads consisting of 3 to 7 scorpions. Their weapons are a shuriken pistol, chainsword, and a man blaster. And their armour confers a 3+ save. If a Guardian represents the basic Eldar, then striking scorpions are a cut above, with superior weapon skill and ballistic skill, initiative and leadership. Though this can be said for aspect warriors in general. The shuriken pistol is a potent close-range weapon, a standout feature being the -2 save throw modifier. I remember my friend using shuriken weapons on my Blood Angels when I was younger. That modifier really put a downer on my power armour. Of course, the real weapon of interest for striking scorpions is the man blaster, which appears on the models and art as these funnels of doom, ready to funnel some punishment to your face in close combat. Also known as the sting of the scorpion, the psychically activated weapon fires a string of tiny metallic needles, which are a conduit for an intense laser energy sting. In-game, each scorpion fires a single shot to model in base contact before hand-to-hand combat is resolved. This is resolved like shooting. If a hit is scored, a roll is made aiming to equal or beat the opponent's toughness. Saves are made at a -2 modifier. What is unclear to me is, does the scorpion make this shot for every combat he is involved in? For example, if the scorpion is in hand-to-hand combat with, say, 2 orc boys, does he fire the blaster twice? Since technically the fights are resolved separately one after the other. I feel like this is something a White Dwarf FAQ might address, but I don't really want to look it up. I'd rather give you lot some comment fodder. So do write about it in the comments if you have an answer to my query. For each aspect warrior squad in your army, you can take an Exarch. The Exarch costs 50 points and has a beefed up profile. They have a 3+ save and come with a las pistol. They can take additional equipment from the Exarch Wargear, assault weapons, special weapons, and grenades section of the Wargear list. And what is interesting is that the Exarch doesn't need to match the aspect of the squad you have taken, and doesn't need to squad up with them if he or she doesn't want to. In addition, each Exarch can have 2 Wargear cards and 2 Exarch warrior powers. In the 3rd edition Eldar Codex, striking scorpions are an elite's choice. Squads of 5 to 10 models in size, and scorpions are 18 points each, with an extra cost of 12 points if you want to upgrade one to an Exarch. Their profile was somewhat different from that of 2nd edition. They had a higher strength, possibly to reflect the fact that chainswords now didn't have a profile, but instead were just the strength of the user. But in 2nd, chainswords were strength 4 anyway. On the other hand, I could just be totally wrong. Scorpions have a lower initiative than in 2nd, but initiative 5 still means they were probably striking first against most Imperial troops. Unlike 2nd, their save is still 3+. There are more Wargear options in this Codex entry. They can be given plasma and haywire grenades for +3 points per model. Plasma grenades allow attacks in close combat to be resolved in initiative order if charging an enemy in cover. Haywire grenades allow for a single attack against a vehicle or dreadnought if it is immobilized or stunned. Roll a d6. 1 does nothing, 2 to 5 is a glancing hit, and 6 is a penetrating hit. Mandy blasters in 3rd edition provided a single strength 4 hit in close combat, resolved at +2 to the model's initiative, and even if they're up to 2 inches away from another enemy model. Normal saving throws do apply. The squad's Exarch may replace their chainsword with a biting blade or scorpion's claw. If a biting blade wounds a model with more than 1 wound, it can roll to wound again and again, as long as the wound roll is successful. The scorpion's claw is both a power fist and a shuriken catapult, and can be used as both in the same turn. The Exarch can have the warrior powers Crushing Blow for 10 points, which is +1 strength in close combat, and Stealth for 20 points, which means the Exarch and squad can infiltrate if the mission allows. Finally, the squad may take a Wave Serpent as a dedicated transport for 110 points. Let's go back to the weapons for a spot of pre-shading. I'm using Reichland Flesh Shade by Citadel to shade the chainsword and the pistol. When the flesh shade has dried, I go for some Imperial Fist contrast paint and apply this all over the chainsword and pistol. And when that has dried, I used some Citadel Flash Kits Yellow to brighten up the flat areas, and the sharp pointy areas, but none of the recesses, in which the shade still remains. I found as well, by mixing Flash Kits Yellow with some of the contrast paint, I can get a little bit of a gradient going. Later on, and off camera, I highlighted the edges of the yellow areas with some Flash Kits Yellow mixed with white paint. Now I wanted a few other areas to be yellow too, so I go and paint these with dark sand. I could have used white and then repeated the same process as with the chainsword and the pistol, but I wanted to get dark sand in this paint job at some point, just for the banter. When the dark sand was dry, I gave it a wash with Reichland Flesh Shade, and then I just repeated the same process that I used before for the other yellow areas. Anyway, that did it for the yellow. I wanted the chainsword blade to be silver, but being old school, I always feel like a black foundation makes silver look better. The first silver I am using is Cold Steel by P Cubed, or is it P3? I've not tried this brand before, but it's got a little ball in it, and I like the description on the side. Neutral medium blue silver. It seems like some manufacturers now are going for these useful descriptions, which I like. So I carefully paint the teeth of the chainsword with this Cold Steel, taking care to leave some black showing in the crevices. And when I had finished, I thought it didn't need a highlight, so I moved on to the next area, namely the helmet, which has some details to colour in. I painted the front of the helmet with Vallejo flat blue, and the Mandiblasters with Evil Sun Scarlet, along with the eye lenses. It was time to tackle the gems. I found a different method through a Google image search which I wanted to try. I think it was meant to be for bigger gems, such as on Wraithlords and things, but I'm going to try and use it anyway. Starting from a black base, I paint a blob of red at the bottom, and a smaller blob above, leaving some black between them. Following that, I paint over the blobs with orange, leaving some red showing, and then I repeat with yellow, and finally a dot of white before I give each gem a coat of gloss varnish. Thanks to Fast More Than Train on Reddit for posting this. Grass green was applied all over the base, followed by some flickering flame, and then dark sand. And that's our fella done, along with all his friends. You may notice that the base of the guy I've painted in this video is a slightly different shade to the green of the others. And if you have far better eyes than me, and I will fix that error, worry not. These are possibly the brightest green models I've ever painted. There are some variations in the scheme across the squad, evidence of experimentation I conducted whilst painting them. Bear in mind, I started these 7 or 8 months ago, with a significant hiatus. It's because I am a hobby butterfly, of course. I just can't resist swapping projects. But I got back to them eventually. At this stage as well, I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who sent me images of striking scorpions on Instagram and Facebook. In case you missed them throughout the video, here's a quick montage of their handiwork. It's always good to turn that grey into something wonderful, isn't it? And painted miniatures, whether they be tabletop standard or Golden Demon winning, are always a joy for me to see. And allow me to serve you notice on doing a Falcon Grav tank and some jet bikes, hopefully in the near future. Now, there's a story behind these models. Indulge me, won't you? I was given these last year by Tim, a valued fan of the channel, and now Instagram buddy. Tim sent me a letter, including this paragraph. Let me read it to you. The Eldar stuff belongs to my former housemate who died last year. He wanted all his miniatures to go to good homes, rather than being sold, and I can't think of a better home for them than yours. Your Miniscape channel brings some joy and relaxation in a grim world, and the least we can do is help you out with some freebies. Honestly, when I first read this, I was quite emotional. Here I was being grafted into this chap's story. His wish was that someone would look after his old miniatures, and that someone turned out to be me. All I can say is, thank you, Tim. Thank you for giving me this awesome responsibility. I feel like I'm part of this legacy now, part of a rather personal and moving hobby story. I just hope that I can do these miniatures justice. I think I'll leave it there for now. And with that, I better go paint some more minis. Take care, and thanks for watching.